Okay, so my name is Kristen Dare Horsley. I work here at TPAC in the Education Department. And on behalf of Gail Williams from Vanderbilt, I want to welcome you to today's Inside Out of the Lunchbox. We're so excited about today's topic because it's near and dear to our hearts here at TPAC Ed because it is on tour right now in the schools. It was last year and it is again this year. And then we actually have 2 opportunities for you all to see this wonderful performance. And you'll see on your program on Thursday, November 6th, we have a 10 a.m. show and a 7 p.m. show. The box office is open today. The tickets are only $8, and so we'd love for you to bring your friends and your family to see this wonderful piece. And we have another honor today, and that we have an author here who is also a descendant of one of the characters, one of the real-life characters in this show, William James, and his book is available in the lobby, and he will sign it afterwards. So we just have so many things happening today that we're excited about, and we want to get to it. Thank you all for coming. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy this wonderful exploration of Burden of Justice.
Dr. Aaron James was to be hung by the neck until dead. That is what it says, right here in the official transcript of his trial. Written just a few months ago, in fact, in my own hand. Right there, in a hand more smooth and fluid than its import should warrant. No waver, no hesitation, no change, neither flourishing nor staggering until the ink would pool at the end of the last letter D. The same as if I wrote, "Dearest Elizabeth, I trust springtime has found you of good cheer." Of course, the good cheer of late has been lacking. Square-faced and deep in a war that divides our nation, our families, and that collides armies with civilians. And the court do therefore sentence him to be hung by the neck until he be dead. Not that I had anything to say in the matter. That comes from much higher up than me. A commission of military officers, in fact, who listened and found Dr. Aaron James, a civilian, guilty. And the commission was, well, is, a formidable one, led by Lieutenant Colonel Galtz, who is... I will risk to disclose here, a man with a manner that doesn't always please those who encounter him. But he does listen to both sides with equal attention, as he did that day. A person known to be a fair man by most, and a pleasant man by some. But, as president of a commission, he has the difficult task of judging with fairness each day for the people of these states. And I do intend here the states of the whole Union. Not even a fool would deny the loss and devastation that is wrought by this action that, as we speak, still tears our country apart. And the path for us to repair as a nation will be fraught with effort and purpose, examination and understanding, which compels me again to this document. This weight of papers no heavier than the old cat, but with a consequence as great as the world to Aaron James and those around him, and those who believed him, and those who didn't. And what say you? Are you inclined to agree with the prosecution here in these pages? Or are you of a mind to think the defense had the upper hand of the closing arguments? Or do you even know the details of the case?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll introduce this little panel here. I'm Steve West. I'm a teaching artist with TPAC Education. And to my left is Cal James. And on the other side is Carolyn German.
Thank you.
The screenwriter. Let's get started at the beginning with Cal. Cal wrote Skirmish at Irish Shanty. How did you get that started?
All right, I'm going to talk about two things, and one is just that, how did I get it started? But I want to give you a little background on the situation that took place a little bit west of here in western Dickson County, near today what's Tennessee City. If you don't know where Tennessee City is, it's just west of Dickson. If you don't know where that is, I can't help you. There were lots of things going on, both regionally, like at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, and John Hunt Morgan's cavalry ride up into southern Indiana and southern Ohio. But the area that was west of Nashville and south of the Cumberland River as it runs through Clarksville and Dover was an area that had little in the way of civil law. It had technically martial law, but the folks who would have been in charge of making that work at Fort Donelson and at Clarksville, well, they would send scouts down, but by and large, it was a no man's land. It was an area of guerrillas and skirmishes and lots of nefarious activity, lots of old scores being settled. And it's within that context on July 1, 1863, that a citizen reported to Colonel Bruce, who was head of post at Clarksville, and said there was guerrilla activity going on in western Dickson County near a place called the Irish Shanty. So Colonel Bruce immediately sends 2 company-sized scouts south, 60, 70 men each, and one is led by Captain Deaver. Captain Deaver makes his way first down to the Cumberland City, and then south along the Yellow Creek Road. Stops after about an hour, sends a few of his men over and arrests John James, who is the brother of Aaron James, and brings him along for the ride. They then proceed southward all the way to the Shanty the next day, on July 2nd. And by the way, the Shanty was a grog shop. That means whiskey, in case you don't know. But also it was a country store and a dry goods store. And they went down, and there Lieutenant Curry led an advance scout of 12 men, and they get to the Shanty a little after lunch. They see a number of men in the yard, and that is where I'll leave you with that. Now, how I got interested, do I have a couple moments? Mm-hmm. Where I got interested in this was as a kid. I would hear these disjointed, very chaotic stories that would last usually 10 seconds. Well, you know, one of your great-great-grandfathers, a guy named Aaron James, almost got hanged. And then somebody else would say, well, you know, he almost, I think he spent time in prison. And I carried that around in my head for about 35 or 40 years and was headed to Washington, D.C. for 4 months and decided I need something to do at night and on the weekends. So turns out I was 10 minutes away from Library of Congress and 30 minutes away from National Archives. And that's how it all got started, and it eventually ended up in a book in 2011.
So, Carolyn, how do you come into this story?
So I came in via the very information that you were able to secure from Washington, D.C. I guess maybe a year or so after you picked those materials up, Cal had connected to a museum in Dickson, the Clement Railroad Museum. And that museum, under the direction at that time of Rob DeHart, had decided that they were going to do an exhibit of this, since it was all very local, and do an exhibit. And they wanted to commission a play or a theatrical piece to commemorate this kickoff and this opening of this exhibit. So they connected and wrote this grant, Tennessee Arts Commission, and they got it, and had called me or contacted me about creating this play. So all that worked, and so I said, great, I'll pick up the materials, and it was a stack this thick of copies of a transcript. And they had some specific guidelines. They wanted it to be a one-actor show, and they wanted it to be 1 hour. So I took on the task, and I was very excited about it. And I started reading the transcript. My immediate thought was that it's a play about the trial of Aaron James, and so Aaron James is going to be our main character, of course. And so I was reading with that in mind. And as I'm reading, you know, I was... one of the things that I do is I do a lot of flagging or post-it note kind of things so that I just know what to come back to. I don't want to bog down with writing actual script at the first pass with something like that. So I was flagging a lot of things, but I found that I was spending a lot of time just trying to figure out what a certain word was, because this is all written out by hand. And I'm like, what is that? What is that? I can't read that. I'll skip ahead. Now I don't know what they're saying. I've got to go back. And I found myself saying, I cannot believe that somebody had to write all this out. And then I thought, one of my favorite phrases is that your problems are your solutions. I can't believe that somebody had to write all this out. Somebody was witness to the whole thing and got all of the information, and only the information, that I'm seeing now. And that was the clerk. And that's when I said, it's the clerk's play to run. Let him take this and let that be the character that we is the leader on this journey. And so the clerk character that you saw in the first excerpt, that character is true in name only. At the beginning of the actual transcript pages, it says that, that this is the person who was the clerk of the court. Other than that, I made up the rest of it. So his life is made up, his desires, and the way he can weave us in and out of the play. And everybody else that exists in the play, all the other 9 characters that this clerk takes on, all of those people are based on that transcript.
What kind of liberties did you take?
I did some very, very much kind of pushing the envelope. And some of that has to do with what the play needed for it to be a play. We had to take these historical documents and take them off the page. Some of it was very much already there. So one character in the play and in the transcript is a gentleman named William Few, and we use him as our comic relief. He's but I didn't invent that he would be comic relief. When I read the trial transcript, he's funny. And so, like, one of the questions, one of the attorneys was pursuing a line of question. At some points, they're talking about did these people who they arrested, were they using military rifles? Were they using ammunition they stole from the U.S. military? So at one point, and they're asking about, how many bullets did you have in your gun and all this. And at one point, he asks William Few, "What was your gun loaded with?" And William Few says, "Bullets." That's funny. I can't write that good. You're right. So, so that tells me that what we did theatrically is capitalize on that. And the character, the attorney, the prosecuting attorney, in his written material, he's beautifully sarcastic. He is. I mean, he just has a power of language and story and twist. And isn't this ridiculous? He came off the page by himself. Others, we had to nudge a little bit and encourage.
All right. Well, how about we see another excerpt?
Sounds great.
Back to the trial.
Now, the responsibility for the counsel for the defense is to, counsel the defense, to present the side of the accused, or in this case, the prisoner. For while the prisoner was there in the room, he did not speak on his own behalf. No. His fate was in the hands of James O. Shackelford, Esquire, of Clarksville, Tennessee, as he began his cross-examination. Did not all the parties at the house, as soon as you rode up to the fence and demanded their surrender, come up and surrender themselves, except Dr. James? Yes, so we thought. And was not James very drunk? Come, sir, you have seen drunk men. Did not James have all the appearance and manner of a drunk man? Did you not place him on his horse when you started out? And did he not fall off his horse in consequence of his intoxication? Yes, a very smart fall indeed. And was he not intoxicated to the extent that his reason was in a great degree overthrown? And after several hours from the time James was captured, did he not seem to recover his senses and act more reasonable? Here Shackelford begins a point of great importance to clarify and press the issue of James's sobriety, or lack thereof. There is a reason why it is important to establish the state of drunkenness that James was or was not in, and not because anyone was looking into the business of saving his soul or his liver. The judge advocate's response has it this way. Here we have a benefit in that we can skip ahead. Here it is. The axiom of the law is that drunkenness is but an aggravation of the offense, and it cannot legally be pled as a defense. It cannot even be held as a circumstance in mitigation unless it be proven that the man was so intoxicated that he was wholly incapable of a rational action. So the degree of drunkenness was pertinent. At this point, quite of a sudden, a question is interjected from the prosecution side. Was it or not your opinion that the prisoner was pretending, crucial word there, pretending to be drunk when he was arrested by you? And Curry was obliged to respond. It was my opinion he was pretending to be drunk. There was a 10-gallon keg at the house, but it was full. Our men broke it up, so I know. But James there, he come out of that house and was cursing and swearing. It seemed like he was not willing to submit. He staggered a little when he first came out. I came to the conclusion that he was playing off and pretending to be drunk, hoping for some reprieve. Well, it's my understanding that he lived a good way off. Seems a far piece to go for a drink. And yes, he made a point of saying he was a physician. But, sir, I did not see any person sick at the place.
Well, everyone has a lot of sifting through truth, trying to figure out what's truth, both in the trial, what's truth, what's fiction. How was it for you two to sort through that? Carolyn, start with you.
I think, one, I had to do a lot of research. I was trying to really stay true to only what was in the transcript. But I still had to do research to determine, was this a normal way to say this? Or was this, would this be a customary concern? All the drinking stuff, I even layered in, because we do for school audiences, I made some choices to let the clerk character, since he talks right to the audience, I let him be a little more knowledgeable and more being more able to transcend time, so that he can make comments that have to do with a modern sensibility for certain things that we feel like are appropriate or not appropriate. And that was a benefit. So I felt like I was able to pull a little away from the exact history by using the main character as a tool to do that. But as far as understanding historically, people are experts at this because it takes a lot of time to become an expert. And so the way I could best honor the piece, I felt, was to pull as much as I can historically, but also know that I have a job theatrically. There are times when something is historically correct, but we don't recall it to be so. So on stage, it looks anachronistic. So we gotta, theatrically, we correct things that would have actually been historically correct, but most people don't know them to be so. Like, I don't know, depending on what year zippers were invented, or when people actually had electricity, and things like that people put together differently in their minds. So there was work there, but it was fun. It really was. And it allowed some of these characters to blossom in ways that I didn't really expect. And I had to check my own qualifying of whether somebody, even as a playwright, if I think a character is, quote, right or wrong, I want to make sure that I'm doing the service to the whole play and not just putting in my own opinion. I want it's got to serve the whole. And so that's a journey we had to pay attention to, too.
Cal, your family had your own recollections. How did that compare with the actual stories?
Well, the recollections had almost nothing to do with the, my last name's James, so I'm cursed with always being someone in the family being closely associated with Jesse and Frank James. So I've learned that there's a lot of fiction out there. But if you read the transcript of Aaron James, I came away the first time I read it, and I wasn't sure what to believe. You could go either way. But then as I got more into a second trial transcript involving 5 other people who were also arrested along with James at the Irish Shanty, and I looked at the some 32-plus trials in the military commissions that were run at Clarksville that were done by Shackelford, where Shackelford, in at least 3 or 4 occasions, comes back to this theme: the person has mitigating circumstances associated with their crime because they were drunk. So he hits this occasionally. Maybe they all were. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that the people at the shanty that day had been drinking. From there, it's in my way of thinking, it's a hard case to make that he was as drunk as his defense attorney was making him out to be. Not because I don't want it to be that way. I don't really care. If he was a drunkard, that's fine. But he comes into this with a very excellent reputation as a doctor. He graduated medical school in 1846-47, the Louisville Medical School, University of Louisville Medical School. Practiced for many, many years, both before and after the Civil War. Very high regard. May have been drinking, but he was also on the wrong side, I think the wrong side during the Civil War. He has at least 2, maybe 3 oaths of allegiance that he signed and broke. He was let go he was captured about a month and a half earlier on Yellow Creek with some southern guerrillas and taken to Fort Donelson, and there got to spend 3 weeks before he signed an oath. He was pretty well characterized as a Southern sympathizer, at least, and was closely associated with that cause. So I don't know, but I doubt seriously if he was as drunk as he said he was, but I don't know that.
This part of the state is pretty important because of the rail lines and the Cumberland River and the Tennessee River. How does that play into what was taking place, do you think?
Yeah, in western Dickson County, just north of what's Highway 70 now? It wasn't there then. It was a different road altogether. But there was the beginning of the Nashville and Northwest Railroad, which had been completed before the war as far as Kingston Springs, but by early 1864 would go all the way to the Tennessee River. Now, in this area, within about a mile of where the skirmish took place, the rail line had already, except for the rails, been put down. There was a berm, there were the mile markers, and they had started to work about a mile or two west of there on some trestles that were necessary between the county line and McEwen, Tennessee. And later, there was lots of guerrilla activity there and associated, of course, with the Cumberland River, because these were primary or would be supply lines to Nashville and the headquarters for the Army of the Cumberland of Union troops. So it was heavily fought over as usually, there were some major battles, but mostly skirmishes associated with rebels attacking supply lines and telegraph poles and the like, and cutting down lines.
Carolyn?
If you have time for just a thought on
Yes,
that. Because I too, when I started reading through, I felt my mind changing one way or the other as to whether this person was guilty or innocent. And I think what I wanted to do with these characters and this play is to make sure I keep that ball in the air. And that the goal of the play is to put it to the audience, what do you think? And part of the way that we pushed some of the characters was to allow for some deeper questions if the audience member wants to go there. So you could look at one character and go, well, obviously X is true because that character says that. But then you think, well, wait a minute, if he's that old, could he really do that? And if he can't hear, can he do that? Or was that a lie? Oh, is he fibbing because this? And so ultimately, I tried to take that same confusion when you're looking at all this stuff and weave it so that it becomes this beautiful net that keeps the question in the air for a longer time.
And Carolyn did such a good job with that. I've seen this show a number of times. I'm the tour manager for it. And I find myself voting differently, you know, even though I see it over and over. And I will tell you this, is it Ewan that's between Clarksville and Dickson? Is it Ewan?
McEwen.
McEwen?
McEwen.
Anyway,
Yeah.
we did a show up there, and with the townspeople from that community, and there were a lot of descendants, James descendants there. And when we got to the end of the story and asked how many thought he was innocent, how many thought he was guilty, 100% said he was innocent. Nobody said guilty.
They also all believed that we're all kin to Jesse James. So,
But at schools, it's usually about 50-50 people voting back and forth. Let's see another excerpt.
Sounds great.
Several more witnesses for the defense were called and asked about James's political leanings, his drinking habits, and more importantly, his whereabouts at the times the Palmyra and Shoals battles took place. Could he have even been there? Or could someone swear at least that he was not? There were several written sworn statements. The first of these was from the prisoner's brother, John James. He states, "My brother has always expressed himself to me or any of his friends as being very much opposed to this bushwhacking business of the guerrilla bands." But then, Sarah Ann Dunnigan, she says, "I suppose he has been at home since the war commenced. However, perhaps I must note that on 2 occasions last winter he was absent. Once, he said, on Duck River on business, and then he went to Columbia for about 5 days, again on business, he said." Interesting. And several more written statements from Clymer, Beverly Bruce, Dodson, Evans and Haley. Yes, here it is. James B. Dunnigan, who on the points of the prisoner's whereabouts answers in agreement of his wife before him. Aaron James was gone twice for extended times. But the colorful Mr. James, he has more to say. "Well, I have known Dr. James to be a Southern man. He was quiet of it. I've never heard him advise other men not to enlist. And while I have known men claiming to be Southern soldiers to have stayed at his home, it was only inasmuch as they were truly sick, and they received their treatment and then went on. But I never heard of guerrillas having been there. Unless, of course, your definition of guerrillas is as men without authority from either side going about the country and taking the property for either side. In that case, sir, the tyranny is afoot, for that is a general thing throughout the neighborhood. All colors of coats have stolen from us. Am I right? 20 chickens stolen just yesterday, and ask them there about the thread in the yard goods. No, no. I can stay to the case of Dr. James. I will, because I also know of what has not been spoken of in full as of yet, that of him being taken to Fort Donaldson. I have heard him say he was down on Yellow Creek for the purpose of hauling some corn. He came across a band of guerrillas who proposed to him to go and hunt or meet the Yankees. That he remonstrated with them against, the impolicy of the measure, telling them they might get into trouble. They persisted. He waited a bit, then rode on behind them as it was in the general direction of the mill he was going. Soon after, ahead of him, he saw the guerrillas were met by a body of Federal soldiers. He turned around. The Federals came on, shooting and firing. He jumped off his horse and hid himself behind a tree till the Federals found him there and compelled him to Fort Donaldson. Well, he may earn nothing for bravery in my view. Still, it's not a tale impossible to be true, considering the times.
Well, there's all kinds of things going on in this type of situation. He addressed the chickens, chickens being stolen. It's tough to get accurate accounts of what was truly taking place. And defense counsel Shackelford makes a great line that he says that many of us know that no two men who engaged in battle ever agreed on the description of it. This does not come from the intention to misrepresent the facts, but from the mental excitement of the vision. I mean, I love that piece right there because it's different sides see it different ways. How do you guys think that applies to today?
Well, I think I'll kind of come at that from the side a little bit. Once the Playwright is done, then my job as a director took over. And so in directing this, in some of the early stages, we talked about creating some archetypes just from a character standpoint, because I have to be able to let the audience differentiate between each of these characters. They've got to see a difference, and it's got to be malleable and visible enough that the actor can make that adjustment really quickly. So we talked about that. And then recently, Brandon and I, in really piecing or pulling apart one of the characters, we really started discovering each of these characters really is more an archetype of a wartime. Somebody like Dunnigan, who we just saw, he did not really, at least, and this is, that speech is tweaked a little bit by me as the playwright, but much of that content, not the chickens part, but but he did say that it's the general thing throughout the neighborhood is that that it's crazy. His indignance at it was not political. He just wants everybody to stop and leave. Just let me do what I do. And how many times do we see that on the news? Whether it's in a city section where there's conflict going on, whether it's gang violence or whether it's, Ferguson and whatever it is, there's always somebody who just says, just could you guys just cool it? Because we're trying to have a life here, right? And then the other characters we meet, you got to meet Curry. And we realized that Curry, I think, was a really good soldier. His fault in his testimony was that he was angry. And we don't, especially in the modern world, we don't like that. If somebody is in a tough situation, we want them to be cool. And if they're a hothead or passionate, sometimes we actually have less respect for what they're saying. And we let that pepper, like how valid somebody may see Curry's opinion. So we also layered in that, is he somebody who's shell-shocked? Is he, PTSD? Is he, what is going on for that soldier? And then we have another soldier who's the superior to Curry. I wanted him to be more, he's the West Point kind of guy. He is cooler and more level-headed. He has a different kind of training and maybe is less passionate than Curry. And then there's a younger guy, the youngest soldier that we meet, and in the transcript it says that he tells the court he is 16 years old. And he actually does speak in a way that it's very confusing as to whether he is trying to speak for the defense or the prosecution. And that makes me sad for him. I think there's a great poem that really impacted me when I was in college called Dulce e Decorum Est. I don't know if that's like a standard literature fare, but it's a poem that really isolates that concept that at the start of something like a war, there is a sense of honor and glory, and then you get in there, and it's not pretty. And I think Mies was that person who thought it was going to be something really glorious and honor-driven and would build him into a man. And by the end of it, he's fallen apart and just wants out. So we found that all of these archetypes that we are building in this play, they all exist. Every time whether you're talking about stuff going on in the Middle East or you're talking about something down the street with some gang violence, all those people exist now.
Cal, you want to follow up on that?
Sure. When you think of modern civil wars, I mean, we think of the armies, but most of the time the civilians are the ones that take the brunt of it. And the same was true of the Civil War. I mean, this was really a no man's land throughout Middle Tennessee, really. And Mies is someone I'd like to pick up on because I was going to talk about him anyway. But he's with Curry, and the 12 men are in the advanced scout that attacks the shanty because they are discovered, and a couple of the people at the shanty start to run, and then Lieutenant Curry asks them to halt 3 times, and then they open fire, and the skirmish begins. But one of the fellows, Jonas Spicer, jumps on his mule and takes off up a road to get out of the whole situation and basically get away. And Mies, along with 2 others, start after him with bullets flying and all that sort of thing. And right before Mies catches up with Spicer, Spicer turns, points the gun directly at him, and tells him, "Stop, or I will kill you, or I will shoot you." And Mies keeps on coming. Now, you can call that bravery, you can call that foolishness. But at the last moment, Spicer throws the gun aside, Mies makes the capture, and they return. Now, at that time, July the 2nd, Mies was 15. He's going to be 16 on July the 4th. And he was a kid. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Mies maybe at the end. Okay.
Nice.
So what did happen after this trial? Or do you want to do the next segment?
That's up to you.
Whatever you want.
Do the excerpt.
Sure.
Let's do the excerpt.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, let's have another excerpt.
Having agreed to offer what is technically called my reply at a time before the argument for the defense has been read, I cannot, as a matter of course, anticipate what grounds may be taken by the counsel for the defense, and therefore must content myself with a brief review of the testimonies and the presentations of such views as present themselves to me on the spur of the moment. The course of events from the time Curry ordered the charge on the shanty has been made clear by several accounts, and that he and his guard were fired on has been established beyond controversy. But we are left with dissent from the defense's side, with several witnesses testifying that no shots were fired from the house. May I see the transcript? Here it is. In the testimony of defense witness J.W. Shelton. Shelton says, "I was sitting in a chair in the yard when they first fired." He is referring here to the federal soldiers. "When they first fired, they advanced. I raised to my feet. I saw that the range of the guns was not at the house but beyond the house. I presumed that they were firing at those that ran away. I did not go into the house." That is what Shelton says. Let us for a moment examine these facts. During this firing, 2 men were seen to run from the house. John Box, who escaped on foot, and Jonas Spicer, who attempted to escape on his mule. They ran, which leaves this. Why? Why did they run? If they were peaceable citizens, assembled there for lawful purposes, why did they run? Why not remain and, conscious of innocent and lawful purposes, await the advance of the federal troops? Some elements of logic are missing. Let us pretend for a moment that innocent men run into the woods, jump on the mules. It is difficult to pretend this. But for the moment, let us pretend that the scene was so frightening as to send an innocent man, to cause a lapse of judgment so great to send an innocent man, upon hearing shots fired, send him from a safe shelter out to bound on the back of a mule and into a bramble, a darkness of woods. That the moment was so frightening. Well, why then does Shelton not run for cover? As a defense witness, he asks us in this commission to take him for a man of reason who is capable of speaking for the defense's side. Well, why then, if this scene was so frightening, and if, as he said, you will recall, I was sitting in a chair in the yard when they first fired, I raised to my feet, I did not go into the house. He expects us to believe that in all this, that so terrified the others, while he, flat in the middle of it, sitting in a chair, when unexpected gunfire rings out, he sits back down and tends to eggs. These accounts do not match up.
Okay, Cal, so now tell us what happened to all these people afterwards.
Well, 3 of them were convicted. 2 of them sentenced to be hanged, James and Jonas Spicer, and another to 5 years hard labor. And 3 were found innocent. And the trial transcripts went up to the Army of the Cumberland, and General, I forgot his name, hold on, General Rosecrans, good Ohioan, said, yep, they're guilty. So he passed James along to General Holt, and General Holt was the Judge Advocate General in Washington, and he sat down and decided, based on the transcripts, that he was not. This went on to Lincoln, President Lincoln. President Lincoln concurred with the Judge Advocate General, and James was released in December of 1863, as were the other 2 men convicted. I would say a couple of points. Spicer is a good example. He was about 30, 31 at the time, and he was a landowner, probably the most wealthy of any of the bunch, and he was a blacksmith, and he would end up marrying a woman named Ellen Choate, who we had gone to the shanty to get a dress pattern for. But then before he was 40, would either die of natural causes or be killed. James, on the other hand, lived until 1907 or 1904, as I recall, remained a physician in the community. Had a little problem after the war. They took his land in 1863, and he spent a number of years trying to buy some more land, finally did, and that's where I grew up in southeastern Humphreys County. Two other people real quickly. One was James Meese. I wanted to pick up on him again. He was mustered out in September 1863 of the Army, joined up again in the mounted infantry, and spent the remainder of the war there. And in 1865, his commander up near Salina, Tennessee, said, "I need a volunteer to try to find a ford across the river, the Cumberland River." Well, of course, Meese volunteered, got in the river, and his horse panicked, and he drowned. So there he was, all of 17 or 18 years old. Let's see, who did I leave? Oh, Shackelford. Yeah, Shackelford, the defense attorney who tried most of the trials of the four different commissions in Clarksville. He went on to join the Tennessee Supreme Court right after the war and stayed there for 4 years, and then retired and went out to Denver and died sometime later, hopefully having a good time. Some pretty interesting people and pretty interesting stories. And there were, if I have just a second, there were over 5,500, at least 5,500 trials of civilians by federal forces. In Clarksville, there were 49 trials. In Nashville, about 200 trials. And throughout western Middle Tennessee, at least 400 trials. And I'm sure that there were a lot more that we don't know about. But lots of activity going on. Believe me, it really opened my eyes to the difference between what we see when we watch a movie about Gettysburg versus the reality on the ground with everything going on, the back and forth of guerrilla warfare and the effects it had on the civilians.
Carolyn, did history play out the way that you would like to see it play out?
Well, I guess I could say that I'm happy as a playwright that I didn't feel like it should go a certain way, but my heart just breaks for poor Meese. There's just something about that youth and the confusion of that. So to know that he did not make it to a very ripe age actually reinforces what we hope to pull at in people's emotions with the Meese character, is that not every soldier is a warrior. Is that a way to put that?
We've got some time for a few question and answers. Anybody would like to know anything?
Anything at all?
Right here, sir.
Well, like I said, I started out not knowing, and I still don't know with certainty, but I think a combination of things suggests that he was guilty. He went through at least 2, maybe 3 oaths of allegiance, violating those. There was a skirmish later that day, about 2 miles from the Irish Shanty, where guerrillas attack the building by the Federals of one of the railroad bridges. So I know that happened, and because a fellow was killed, and we have a good record of it. and there were 10 dozen eggs cooking in the front yard. In fact, I think it was, it doesn't matter who, but James Shelton, who said cook 10 dozen. Well, there were 8 people, if you believe the southern side, the people at the shanty. If you believe them, there were only 8 or 9 people there. So if there were 20 or 30 more, as suggested by Curry in his reconnaissance, that makes a lot more sense for cooking 10 dozen eggs.
And if I can add to that, with the way that the tidings, the prosecuting attorney actually lays out in his final argument, it's pretty compelling. And I think a modern audience, if you replace the historic nature of the characters, I think more modern audiences would see them as guilty, even if they didn't convict them of those certain things. You see juries where it feels like, well, of course he's guilty, but there was some sort of detail that made it seem like, but we can't convict them on that. But I think that is important too, is that I think as we watch it from a distance, it's easier to see some of these things as almost on James's part, some of it reads almost heroic, like, militiaman fighting for his property, and I don't, in the moment, we wouldn't agree that that's the case in a modern setting. I don't think we would find him stoic or heroic. And I think history does that to us, that we distance ourselves from the nuts and bolts. Like you were talking about, the difference between the picture on the diorama at Gettysburg, or not the diorama, what do you call that, the panorama? But there's kind of a historical proscenium that we kind of see things in from those history book pages that we look at, which is very different from being in the moment and actually having, if you pick up, go pick up a marble and think about that like coming at you at how many miles an hour. That's a musket ball, right? So the reality of what things really were like, it was quite different than what we might perceive from the safety of our seat. So the goal is to pull that apart and encourage the audience to have fun on this journey and also try and figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Just one more comment. After being found guilty and General Rosecrans saying the same thing, when it went to Holt, Judge Advocate General Holt has the name is the same as Aaron James' wife's name, Holt, her maiden name. Now it's a common name, but Aaron James was in Louisville, Kentucky, attending the University of Louisville Medical School at the same time Joseph Holt was there. He marries Elizabeth Holt sometime between 1847 and 1850, which brought me to conclude, what if the two are related? So I spent days looking through the Holt letters at the Library of Congress, trying to find a dear cousin letter or whatever. Never found anything, but that would make a great story. But unfortunately, it's very possible that Elizabeth Holt is actually the daughter of William Holt of Tennessee. Don't know that for sure. It's not 100%. So I'm still holding out for maybe there was a connection there. But that's where the change happened with Holt, who was usually a hardliner. Mm-hmm. And he actually changed from guilty to making the recommendation to let him off.
Well, the thing that always gets me is it comes down to the shots being fired from the house. And the only witnesses to those shots being fired were 2 Union officers. Nobody else saw those. So that's what leaves me sort of waffling on innocent and guilty.
And when you come to see the play, because I think that's a powerful, pivotal moment. But I think in Tidings' reply, there was something that I won't tell you what it is, but there was something that compelled me to say, oh, wait a minute, of course, there's no way he's innocent. And it is those kinds of questions that I guess keep it intriguing.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
President Lincoln's.
Sure. It was short. He wrote, sentence disapproved, put the date on it, and the A. Lincoln signature. No, the logic is mostly found in Holt's, I think it's 8 pages of written summary, and he just tacked onto that, which was common for Lincoln. When he would disapprove something, he didn't go into a lot of reasoning behind it.
Carolyn, what did you say at that point? Since it's approved, I'm tired of the business of.
Yeah. So, and that is a Lincoln, a quote that I found that Lincoln actually said, "I'm trying to evade the butchering business lately," and I think that's really important that. There's a bigger picture, so that I won't add too much to that, so I don't give away the end.
So you can come see this great show right here at TPAC on November 6th. There's 2 performances, one at 10 a.m., one at 7 p.m. Admission $8. The box office is open now. Books are available. Cal will be around if you'd like to get a book or ask questions. You're welcome to do that. And also, Cal is available for talks either on Irish Shanty or Civil War stuff. And I also want to give Carolyn a plug that she is available for corporate workshops and bringing one-man play types. I mean, not necessarily one-man plays, but guest speaker, corporate training type stuff. So please see here. There's
work with improv and using the actors' tools for productivity, and also a talk we do on alternative spaces. So,
and I believe these are out in the lobby, right?
Great.
So thank you all for coming. Stick around if you'd like to ask some more questions.
Thank you so much.